Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. All right, guys, we are now pleased to be joined by Mitchell Forde of Power Mizzou. You can follow him on Twitter at Mitchell 4, that's the number 4D, at Mitchell 4D, and he covers Missouri. Mitchell, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Bud.
Dude, really excited to dive into this. We're doing 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 minutes on each team as their spring games wrap up. Some kind of summer reading. We'll figure out what the actual title for this will be in post-production. So Missouri last year, kind of an up and down season, power rated in the 60s, which is bottom half of the SEC, but they still managed to make a bowl game, which had to be pretty nice for Coach Drinkwitz. What was kind of the general sentiment there on Missouri after the year?
I think it was probably slightly underwhelming, but could have been worse given how it started. And I think probably because it got better as the season went on, it was a little easier for fans to swallow and have some excitement for next year. Going into the season, there were definitely people who were talking about that as a 8-9 win team, which seemed a little unrealistic to me, but if you got the bounces to fall right, I could have seen it's possible. They started off really poorly. I think they started off 0-3 in the SEC, or at least 0-2, and then also lost to Boston College. So the first 3 Power 5 teams they played, they lost. Ended up going 6-6 in the regular season, making a bowl game, losing to Army. So there's people still pretty optimistic about the program, in large part because of Eli Drinkwitz's recruiting. He's brought in back-to-back top 20 classes, at least on the Rivals rankings. But there's definitely starting to get to be a little urgency to seeing some results translate on the field.
For sure. And obviously it's tough to formulate expectations for a program that's still relatively new to the league. They've been in for about a decade now or so.
Yeah, right. 10 years. This will be the 10th season.
There you go. And some decent hope for this year as well, with kind of a cake non-conference. I mean, Kansas State and then 3 pretty much automatic wins, unless you're a bigger Louisiana Tech fan than I am. I want to start with the offense here. So the offense certainly carried the team last year. They were 52nd, and Bill Connolly, Mizzou alum, his SP Plus ratings. But they lose Connor Bazelak, who I think was better in 20 than he was in 21. I guess we should start there with QB. What is the state of the QB position? Are you expecting better quarterback play, worse? Do you even know? What are we thinking here?
Yeah, that's the big question mark. And that is going to determine, I think, a lot about this season. And that is what I don't know the answer to, because I just still don't know who the quarterback's going to be. As of right now, I think it would be Brady Cook, who was Connor Bazelak's backup for last season, but then took over as the starter for the bowl game. But Mizzou's still pursuing transfers. They hosted JT Daniels on a visit a couple weeks ago. He's still deciding. I think he's visiting West Virginia. I think it's this weekend, maybe the following weekend, and then he should have a decision. They hosted Jaden Daniels before he went to LSU. They've been in on a couple other guys. So clearly there is some thought that position could use some upgrading. They're also bringing in a pretty highly touted high school recruit in Sam Horn, who's going to hit campus in June. I would be a little surprised if he was taking over as the starting quarterback right away. That'd be a pretty quick turnaround for not having been there for spring ball. But yeah, I mean, Connor Bazelak really struggled towards the tail end of last season, which is why he got replaced in the bowl game and ultimately transferred. I think that Mizzou fans would hope that regardless of who the quarterback is, they can be more effective than we saw from Bazelak the last 6 weeks or so of last season. But there's no sure thing there right now, and that's why they're pursuing transfers.
For sure. Things seem a little bit rosier at receiver, it looks like.
Yeah, definitely. That's the position I think people are most excited about, and it has a lot to do with Luther Burden, the nation's number 1 wide receiver, who's coming in out of East St. Louis. Mizzou beat out Georgia and Alabama to get him, so it was obviously a really big deal. And the expectations for him are really high. He looks solid in the spring game. I don't want to draw too many conclusions from the spring game, but he did show an ability with the ball in his hands that I haven't seen from a Missouri player in a little while. And then you add in a group of guys coming back. You've got Dominic Lovett, who's also from East St. Louis. You've got Mookie Cooper. You've got Towski Dove, who's a pretty reliable downfield threat. Barrett Bannister, who's going to be like an 11th year senior. So they should have some guys who can make some plays with the ball in their hands.
Stylistically, are you expecting anything really different from Missouri's offense this year, be it tempo or run pass distribution?
I think for the most part, Eli Drinkwitz knows what he wants to do, and you won't see anything too drastic. The couple things I would look for is one, maybe some more quarterback run. Connor Bazelak was very, very immobile, especially he was dealing with an injury for most of last season, but he did not want to run. Brady Cook,
that game he beat Florida was like he couldn't move.
Oh no, he really, yeah. I mean, he couldn't.
Yeah.
He did have a hamstring injury, but still, even before that, he did not want to try to carry the ball. So I think you'll see some more of that. Obviously, if JT Daniels were to come in and be the guy, maybe not so much. He's not a runner either, but Brady Cook is. Tyler Macon, the other guy on the roster right now, is a runner. So I think you could see some more of that. I think you'll probably see a little less heavy reliance on the running game, on just the traditional running game with the tailback, because Tyler Beatty's gone. He was so good last season. He averaged something like 28 touches a game. I think you'll see it get spread out a little bit more, and maybe the run game incorporated more into like some swing passes to wide receivers or little bubble screens, the quote unquote extensions of the running game. But for the most part, I think we know what Eli Drinkwitz is looking to do.
All right, so I think we pretty much trust Drinkwitz to put together at least a decent, if not better than decent, offense, even in the SEC, with that receiver talent. Now I got to ask you about the defense. And by almost any conference standard, this was a pretty poor defense last year. I think Connolly had him 92nd in the country. I know there was a decent amount of injuries that seemed to cluster at certain positions at times. What are you expecting a better defense this year? If so, how much better do you think?
I think it would be hard to be worse. I mean, for much of last season, they were dead last in the country against the run and bottom 5 in FBS in overall defense. So they did get better as the season went on, which is part of the reason I think people are optimistic that they can continue to kind of turn the corner. Steve Wilkes did leave for the NFL, but Eli Drinkwitz and Blake Baker, who replaced Wilkes, have talked a lot about trying to keep some of the same schematic elements and a lot of the same language, so there's not so much of a learning curve. And that's really what they blamed the struggles on last season, was that what Steve Wilkes wanted to do was so drastically different from what Ryan Walters wanted to do that players were just kind of lost out there for the first half of the season. It took them a while to understand where they were supposed to be and their responsibilities within the defense. And they are bringing a lot of those same guys back. They lost some production at linebacker and Blaze Aldridge, lost, a couple interior defensive linemen, but for the most part, you have a lot of guys back. And so I would expect that it probably, I don't know if it'll be, the strength of the team, but I can't see it being as bad as it was for the first part of last season, just because that was as bad as it gets. They gave up 400 yards rushing to Tennessee. They were giving up over 270 yards a game on the ground for part of the season. So I think that if you were to just have fixed that early in the season, you probably have a couple more wins on the schedule. So I think it'll be better than what we saw early last year.
And now we'll go to the portal. Quite a few guys have come into for Missouri. They also lost Mekhi Wingo, right, to LSU. He was going to start for them, I assume, right?
I think so, yeah. He didn't start last season, but I mean, he played the most snaps of any defensive tackle.
But they bring in two guys of the two at D tackle. I mean, just looking at here, if you give up 400 yards rushing in Tennessee and averaging 270 on the ground, who of the defensive line transfers do you think will make the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think that Jaden Jernigan out of Oklahoma State, they'll have some pretty big expectations for him. That was a guy who, I mean, kind of surprised me. He was playing quite a bit on an Oklahoma State defense. I think finished, I want to say 5th overall and 4th against the run in the country last year. So a really good group. He wasn't starting, but he was in the regular rotation, and he just decided he wanted to go somewhere and start, and that's Missouri's benefit. So I think the expectations for him will be pretty high. They've got a couple other guys on the defensive line as well, who I think are going to be probably spending a little more time at end. You've got Tyrone Hopper or Tyrone Hopper. There's 2 Hoppers, Tyrone and Tyrone. It's very confusing. and Ian Matthews from Auburn. Ian Matthews is a guy who I think is a little bit more developmental, but if I had to pick one, it would for sure be Jaden Jernigan.
Awesome. All right. Last one is staying in the portal here. You already mentioned quarterback, maybe JT Daniels, maybe an alternate candidate. When we see all these spring games finish, we'll see the depth charts shake out. If not quarterback, is there one other spot on this team that you expect Missouri to be actively in pursuit of as they get ready for the fall?
Yeah, I could see a few other spots. I don't know if there's anything as glaring as quarterback. That's for sure would be number one. But I think they could maybe use another defensive back. They were really thin at cornerback over the spring. They had a couple guys out with injury where they were putting out a bunch of guys who had never played before on kind of the first team in spring. That signals to me maybe they might look for some more depth there. Tight end, they already brought in one transfer, but they don't have a single tight end on the roster who's caught a pass in a Missouri uniform. So depending on what they saw out of that group in spring, I could see that being a potential position of need as well.
Awesome. Mitchell, really appreciate the time. Follow Mitchell on Twitter at Mitchell 4D, Mitchell 4D, like 40, get it? And awesome, man. Really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see y'all soon.